Hi there, I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to look at how to use Google's material design components, just the plain old web versions that you can find at material.io inside of a Svelte project. Not a Svelte kit project per se, although I'm guessing that the same methods would work. This is just the normal Svelte official template that you can find at the SvelteJS repo. And just to show what we're going to be implementing here, we're going to build a reusable button component that works in Svelte without using any kind of wrapper or anything like that. There's a few projects out there that use a wrapper method to get this to work, including Svelte Materialify is one option, and there's a few others. For compatibility reasons and just not liking too many packages and middlemen, I prefer to just use the code straight from Google's material.io site here. So that's what we're going to do. And what this gives us for the button component is just this nice ripple effect that you can see as I'm clicking this button here. The process that we're following here should work for most of the components on the page. All of them are a little bit finicky and not obvious how to set up. But if you follow the basics here, it should give you a good start towards getting this to work. So we're going to first go to github.com/SvelteJS/template. This is just the kind of standard vanilla, if you will, template that's available in the official Svelte repo. We're going to scroll down the page a little bit and go to these two commands. We're going to copy them. I'm going to use Command C on my Mac. If you're on Linux or Windows, it'll be Control C. And then I'm just going to flip over to my terminal here. This is just my standard terminal on my Mac. And I am going to figure out what folder I want to use. I had pre-made a folder called Svelte Material, and that's what I'm going to go into. Then I'm going to paste those commands right there. In some terminals, you're not going to be able to paste, so you might have to just type them out. But on mine, I can paste. So now I'm just going to hit enter. It's going to download the repo from GitHub and move us into the folder that it created. Okay, so now we have this folder called Svelte app that's in turn inside of my folder that I earlier created called Svelte Material. And I'm going to open this up in Visual Studio Code by typing code space dot. If you want to do that, that's something that you're going to have to set up yourself if you haven't already. Otherwise, you can just open up the folder in any text editor however you want, and all the instructions here should work exactly the same way. So when I hit enter, it's going to open Visual Studio Code here. And the first thing that I'm going to do is open up a terminal by kind of swiping up from the bottom there and typing in npm install, which is going to go ahead and install all of the dependencies that we need. This is a little bit big, so I'm going to make it a touch smaller. All right, now that went ahead and installed. So next we're going to install a few more dependencies that we need to make this work, specifically a number of Rollup plugins and node packages needed to make Sass work, which is what is needed to make Google Material components work. This is really nice to have in your project anyway, even if you aren't using material design. So I wouldn't sweat too much about doing all of this. And it's possible that there's different configurations and bunches of packages that would work with this. This is just the specific mix that I've found that works. So if you're following along, I'd recommend just trying this exactly because it's pretty finicky. So I'm going to do npm I hyphen uppercase D to tell npm that these are going to be dev dependencies. And then I'm going to type in auto prefixer, node Sass, post CSS, Sass, and Svelte preprocess. Okay, I'm going to hit enter and it's going to install those. And it's probably going to take a minute or so here, and I'll fast forward. All right, the installation completed, and I just want to note that at a certain point in the installation, it seems to freeze up a little bit, but if you're just patient and let it go, it usually goes through. So the next thing we're going to do here is just see if our dev server is working. So I'm going to type in npm run dev to get that up and running. I've got some other projects going here, so it's not taking port 5000, which it probably will on your computer. But I'm just going to copy this here. We're at localhost colon 58322 and open it up in my browser. In this case, I'm using Chrome. I usually use Firefox, but today we'll be in Chrome. And this is what we've got. So this is the Svelte app that was set up for us from this repository here. And before we get going here, I want to just clean this up a little bit and take out some of the things that we don't need. So the first thing that I'm going to do is go into the public folder here and click on index.html down here. I'm just going to pull out this reference to this global.css style sheet. I'm just going to delete that line because I don't want any other styles messing with what we're doing here. And while we're at it, we can just delete this global.css file right here. All right, so that's everything I wanted to do in the public folder. We'll move down to the src folder, which is short for source. I'm going to go into the main.js file here, and I'm just going to pull out these three props lines here. This is all still going to work if you don't do it, but we're not going to be using that, so I'm just going to clean that right up. And then we're going to open app.svelte, which is also in the source file. And this is the main component that we see on the screen here. In fact, you can see that this turned back to an old font because I already started to pull out some of the styles. But we're going to pull out the rest of the styles that are here in the app.svelte component. And then we're going to pull out this markup between the main tags. And we're also going to pull out this prop export there. And we're going to save it. So literally all that we have left is the opening and closing script tags here. And then we have a nice clean project with nothing here, so we can move forward with implementing the Google Material Design components. So now, if we go to the page on Google's site, this is material.io/components/buttons. And if you flip over to the implementation tab here and you make sure you're on web, there's a few other options. So just choose web here. We're going to find another npm package that we need to install. So I'm going to copy this here and open up a second terminal here and paste in that installation command and hit enter. It's going to take 1 second here. All right, that's done. So now if you look into our package.json here, you can see that we've added a few things that weren't there in the original template. So in our non-dev dependencies down here, we've got the material button. And we also added this Svelte preprocess. We added Sass. We added post CSS. We added node Sass, and we added auto prefixer. Now, before we get into actually implementing this, there's one more thing we've got to do, which is make all of this actually work in the bundler. So we're going to go up into the rollup.config.js file, and we're going to make all the stuff work. Okay, so I'm going to go right here and type in import Svelte preprocess. That auto-completed some stuff that isn't exactly what I wanted. So I just want import Svelte preprocess from Svelte preprocess in quotes, okay? Just like this. And then down here, under plugins, go to this closing curly of compiler options, type a comma and hit enter. And then type preprocess colon, and then open some square brackets. Then we're going to type in Svelte preprocess, and then we're going to open parentheses, and then we're going to open curlies, and hit enter. We're going to type source map, not production, comma. Unless you want it, then you can just write true there. And then we're going to do post CSS, colon, and open curlies. And then we're going to do plugins, colon, open square brackets, require, open parentheses, insert quotes, and type in auto prefixer. Okay. Then when we hit save, it's gonna format itself and add in some more commas depending on your text editor, and then we should be good to go. So I'm just gonna leave this here for a second so you can see what it is, and remind you one more time that you also need this. All right, so now that we have that set up, we're going to go ahead and get started with actually implementing this stuff. The first thing that we want to do is in our app.svelte file here, we're going to open a style tag here. And to make sure that these styles are applied globally and not locally scoped, which is something that is needed to make this work, at least in my experience, we're going to type global here, and then we're also going to type in lang equals SCSS, like that. And when we go back here, you'll see that the next step is to copy over this line of code that implements Google's styles. Okay, and this isn't CSS, this is Sass, and that's why we had to install all that stuff before, and why we have to type in this language here. But if we go ahead and paste that line of code in here, we should now be applying those button styles from Google that we installed with this package here globally through our app.svelte component. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. Nothing will have changed here because we haven't actually added anything yet, but we're still just working on some setup. And now this has all been pretty straightforward so far, but there's a few more tricky things that we need to do to actually make this work. You would think that we could just go right in our app file and pull all this in and that it would work, and maybe some of you can make that work, but I couldn't. So the way that I got it to work was by doing another component here, which honestly is a better approach anyway. So we're going to create a new file here and call it material_button.svelte. You can call it whatever you want, but that's what I'm going to call it. And in material button, we're going to open and close a script tag here, and we're going to import onMount from Svelte. Okay, now onMount is just a tool that Svelte gives us that's built into the framework that lets us execute certain code only after the HTML has mounted. So the way that you call that is by going onMount and then doing the call with parentheses there, and then we're going to open an anonymous arrow function inside, and that's where we're going to put the code that we want to run. And this is one of the tricks to make this work. But before we do that, we need to import the ripple effect that's going to show up on the button by copying over this line of code. So I'll put this down under the onMount import up here. So now we're importing onMount, and we're importing MDC ripple. Okay. And then we're going to take this line of code here, and we're going to copy it inside of the onMount call here, like that. All right. And then down below, we are going to copy over just this simple code from the text button here as markup below the script tag here. Okay. So now if we go over here, let's see, am I still on the same? Oh, it's not showing up because we haven't pulled it into our app.svelte file yet. So what we're going to want to do to make it actually show up here is inside of the script tags here in app.svelte, we're going to import material button from /material button.svelte. In the real world, I'd probably put this in some kind of a utilities folder because we're going to make it a reusable component. But for simplicity here, we're just going to do it all in one folder. And then below the script tag, where we typically put the markup, I'm just going to insert that button there like that and hit save. And we'll see if it shows up here. All right, we've got it showing up here. And you can see it's got the ripple effect and everything. But there's one problem. What happens when we copy it over a second time? Well, we've got the ripple effect still working here, but it's not working on the second one. Here, I'll make this a little bigger so you can for sure see it. We've got the ripple effect working here, but it's not working here. So let's fix that. And the way we're going to fix that is by giving each button a unique ID. Okay, so up in this line of code in the onMount call here, I'm going to switch the query selector to get element by ID. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do this, but this is just the way that I'm choosing to do it. I'm going to pass in what's going to be a prop here of ID. And to make this work down below, we've got to say export let ID to allow us to pass in the ID prop from the parent. Okay, and then from here, I can do ID equals, for example, 1, and ID equals, for example, 2. And then we're passing in the IDs of 1 and 2 respectively into this material button here. And then the last thing we've got to do is inside of this button tag here, we can just like this say ID. And the reason this works is because instead of doing ID equals ID like that, just because they're the same name, we can just shorten it to just ID in curlies. And now if we save that, we should be getting working, yep, ripple effect on both of these buttons. So that's generally how you make it work when you're using multiple components in Svelte, is you put the component naked, if you will, inside of its own component. Then you make sure each of them has their own unique ID so that the initialization with Google's code doesn't get confused. Okay, so just to kind of complete this up, what I also would do is pass in a text prop and an onClick prop. Now, I would prefer to just define the onClick function right in here, but it doesn't quite work. Again, at least I couldn't get it to work. It seems that it doesn't work that way with these types of imported components. So we're just going to do also props for the button text or the label, and then we're going to do a prop to pass in the function that you want to run when you click the button. Okay, just like this. So we've got, just to recap, these three let us pass in props from the parent component. This ID is being used here to initialize the component with Google's code. And then we're passing it in here, which is going to give the button element the ID of ID, in this case 1 or 2. Text is going to come in once we do it from the app.svelte component, and that's going to be printed as a label. Instead of undefined, it's going to say whatever we pass through. And then the onClick function is what's going to run when the button is actually clicked from the parent component. So we can do this by, we'll say text equals first button, and text equals, whoops, and text equals second button. And then we can pass in the onClick function. So we're gonna just do something simple like console.log. You just clicked the first button. All right, so copy that over here, and we'll say you just clicked the second button. So now we've got two instances of the button, each with unique IDs, which again is required to make this work, unless you're doing some kind of a loop over all the components, which you might be able to do. But this is just a very clean way of making it work, in my opinion. We've got unique text, and then we've got functions, all being passed through as props to the material button here. And now, if we open up our console here, you can see when we click the first button, it's going to say you just clicked the first button. And when we click the second button, it'll say you just clicked the second button. And we've got the ripple effect working in both cases. If this isn't working for you, try going back and doing it just exactly the same way again, or maybe looking at the exact version numbers that I showed in the package.json file. This is pretty finicky, but honestly, I really like this solution because it's a good way of doing buttons anyway. It's good to build your own reusable components, and so it's really not that much more hassle to do this stuff to be able to use the material components that Google so kindly gives us. And again, to me, it's just a little bit cleaner than using some middleman library that kind of copies over the Google code and then builds it into its own wrapper. I always find that kind of thing just not to be the best approach. It's usually a little bit behind. There's usually lots of quirks and what have you. And don't get me wrong, this method isn't perfect either, but it's just my preferred approach. So hopefully it helps somebody else out there. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments. I may or may not be able to see and answer them, but you can definitely give it a shot. Hope this helped somebody, and hope you have a good day. Thanks. Bye.